caught my wife planning to divorce me and take half my assets. So I legally transferred everything to my son first. 3 months ago, my entire world crumbled when I discovered something that still keeps me awake at night. I was looking for my laptop charger in my wife's home office when I accidentally knocked over a stack of papers. As I bent down to pick them up, I saw documents that made my blood run cold. Legal paperwork from a divorce attorney, asset valuations of our properties, and handwritten notes calculating what she could potentially get in a settlement. My hands were shaking as I read through everything. She had been planning this for months, maybe even longer. The documents were dated back 6 months, which means while I was celebrating our anniversary and thinking about planning a surprise vacation for us, she was already plotting her exit strategy. What hurt the most wasn't just the betrayal itself, but how calculated and cold everything felt. The papers detailed every single thing we owned together. Our house, the rental property we bought 5 years ago, my business equipment, even my personal collections that I had spent years building. She had researched everything down to the exact dollar amounts. There were notes about hiding certain purchases and timing the divorce filing to maximize her potential settlement. I sat on our bedroom floor for what felt like hours, just staring at these documents and trying to process what I was seeing. This woman I had shared my life with for over a decade was treating our marriage like a business transaction she wanted to exit profitably. The worst part was realizing how normal everything had seemed between us recently. She had been acting completely natural, asking about my day, making dinner plans, even talking about redecorating the guest room. That night, I could barely look at her across the dinner table. She was chatting about some drama at her book club, and all I could think about was whether she was calculating the value of our dining room set while she spoke. Every smile felt fake. Every casual touch felt manipulative. I excused myself early and spent the night in the guest room, claiming I had a headache. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I had missed before. How she had been asking seemingly innocent questions about my business finances. How she had suggested we update our home insurance, probably to get current property valuations. How she had been encouraging me to put more money into joint accounts instead of keeping it separate. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever imagined possible. This wasn't some sudden decision or emotional breakdown. This was a carefully orchestrated plan that had been in motion for months while I remained completely oblivious. I felt like the biggest fool in the world. But then something clicked inside me. If she wanted to play games with our assets, I could play too. I spent the next week researching everything I could about asset protection and divorce law in our state. I learned about timing, about what constitutes marital property, and most importantly, about legal ways to protect what I had worked so hard to build. The solution came to me when I was talking to my son about his future plans. He's 22, just graduated college, and incredibly responsible with money. We had always had a great relationship, and I knew I could trust him completely. That's when I realized there might be a way to protect my assets legally while also setting him up for success. I consulted with 3 different attorneys to make sure everything I was planning was completely legal and above board. I wasn't trying to hide assets or commit fraud. I was simply making legal transfers of property to my adult son, which is something parents do all the time for estate planning purposes. The process took about 6 weeks to complete. I transferred ownership of the rental property to my son, along with most of my business equipment and personal collections. We set up proper documentation showing these as gifts for estate planning purposes, which is perfectly legal. My son understood the situation and was supportive of helping protect our family's assets from what felt like a predatory scheme. The timing was crucial. All the transfers were completed and legally recorded before she filed any paperwork. When someone plans to take half of everything you've worked for your entire life without even having the courtesy to discuss problems in the marriage first, you do what you need to do to protect yourself. I also started documenting everything. I took photos of the divorce papers I had found, saved copies of all her research, and kept detailed records of her behavior and comments. If this was going to turn into a legal battle, I wanted to be prepared. The hardest part was continuing to act normal around her while knowing what was coming. Every day felt like I was living with a stranger who was planning to destroy my life. I had to bite my tongue when she made suggestions about spending money or making joint purchases. I had to pretend everything was fine when she talked about future plans that I knew she had no intention of following through on. Update 2 weeks later. The bomb finally dropped last Friday, and honestly, I was almost relieved when it happened. She sat me down after dinner with this serious expression and started talking about how she had been thinking about our relationship and whether we were really compatible long-term. She used all the typical phrases about growing apart and wanting different things. What really got to me was how rehearsed it all sounded. She had clearly practiced this speech, probably in front of a mirror. She talked about needing space to find herself and how divorce might be the best option for both of us. The whole time, I could see her mentally calculating dollar signs, thinking about how she was about to cash in on years of marriage. I played dumb and acted shocked, asking if we could try counseling or if there was anything I could do to fix things. She shook her head sadly and said she had already made up her mind. Then came the part one was waiting for. She started talking about how we should handle things fairly and split everything equally since we had built our life together. The next morning, she was already on the phone with her attorney, probably thinking she had caught me completely off guard. I let her believe that for now. I spent the day acting devastated and confused, which honestly wasn't entirely an act. Even though I had known this was coming, actually hearing her say the words still hurt. Over the weekend, she became increasingly cold and businesslike. She started taking inventory of our belongings and asking questions about account balances. She even had the nerve to ask if I had any hidden assets or accounts she should know about for the divorce proceedings. The audacity was unbelievable. Monday morning, she officially moved into the guest room and announced she would be filing papers this week. She had this satisfied look on her face, like she thought she had executed the perfect plan. She even made some comment about how she hoped we could keep things civil and handle the asset division without too much drama. That's when I knew it was time to reveal my hand. I calmly told her that she might want to review our current asset situation before filing anything. The confusion on her face was priceless. I explained that over the past several weeks, I had legally transferred ownership of several major assets to our son for estate planning purposes. The color drained from her face as I listed everything that was no longer marital property. The rental property, the business equipment, my collections, all of it now belonged to our son. I showed her all the legal documentation proving the transfers were legitimate and completed weeks ago. She went from shocked to furious in about 30 seconds. She accused me of hiding assets and threatened to have her attorney challenge everything. I remained calm and explained that everything was done legally and transparently, with proper documentation and legitimate estate planning purposes. The best part was watching her realize that all those months of careful planning and calculation had been for nothing. Instead of getting half of a substantial portfolio, she would be splitting what remained, which was significantly less than she had anticipated. She stormed out of the house and didn't come back until late that night. I could hear her on the phone in the guest room, presumably with her attorney, and her voice sounded increasingly frustrated. I imagine she was learning that legal asset transfers to adult children are perfectly valid and not something that can be easily challenged in divorce proceedings. Update 1 month later. The past month has been an absolute whirlwind, and I'm honestly exhausted from all the legal drama. Her attorney tried every angle they could think of to challenge the asset transfers, but everything was done properly and legally. They even hired a forensic accountant to try to prove I was hiding assets, but all they found was exactly what I had declared. The most frustrating part for her was learning that the timing of everything was completely legal. Since she hadn't filed any papers or made any legal claims when I made the transfers, there was no basis to call it fraudulent. Her attorney actually told her she should have moved faster with her original plan. What I didn't expect was how this whole situation would affect our son. At first, he was supportive and understood why I needed to protect our family assets. But as things got messier and more contentious, he started feeling caught in the middle. His mother began pressuring him to transfer everything back to me so she could get her share in the divorce. The pressure got so intense that my son actually came to me in tears, saying he didn't want to be part of this fight anymore. He felt guilty about having all these assets in his name and worried that he was destroying what was left of our family relationships. It broke my heart to see him struggling with something that was supposed to protect our family. That's when I realized I needed to make a difficult decision. Yes, I had legally protected the assets, but at what cost? My son was miserable. My wife was becoming increasingly vindictive, and I was starting to question whether the whole thing was worth it. The turning point came when she escalated things beyond just the divorce proceedings. She started making accusations about my character to mutual friends and even contacted some of my business associates with insinuations about my integrity. She was trying to damage my reputation because she couldn't get to my assets. I knew I had to end this before it destroyed everything and everyone I cared about. So I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I asked my son to transfer everything back to me, knowing full well that it would mean she would get her share in the divorce. But here's where things took an unexpected turn. When my son went to process the transfers back to me, we discovered something that changed everything. While reviewing all the legal documents, we found that she had actually forged my signature on several financial documents months ago, apparently trying to set up additional joint accounts that would increase her potential settlement. The forgery was discovered when the bank required additional verification for some of the larger transfers. They had copies of documents with my signature that I had never signed, authorizing things I had never agreed to. When we compared them to my actual signature, the differences were obvious. This changed everything. What had started as a divorce proceeding now involved potential criminal charges for fraud and forgery. Her attorney immediately distanced himself from her case when presented with the evidence. She went from being in a position to claim half of everything to potentially facing criminal prosecution. Final update 6 weeks later. I never imagined when this whole ordeal started that it would end the way it did. The discovery of the forged documents completely changed the trajectory of everything. What had been a contentious but civil divorce proceeding turned into something much more serious. The authorities took the forgery evidence very seriously, especially since it involved significant financial amounts. She was arrested and charged with fraud and forgery. Her original divorce attorney withdrew from the case entirely, and she had to find new representation for both the criminal charges and the divorce proceedings. The criminal case actually strengthened my position in the divorce significantly. Her premeditated fraud demonstrated exactly the kind of calculating behavior I had suspected all along. The judge was not sympathetic to someone who had been planning to defraud their spouse for months. In the end, the asset transfers I had made turned out to be unnecessary from a legal standpoint, but they had served their purpose in protecting everything during the most vulnerable period. My son transferred everything back to me once it became clear that the divorce settlement would be heavily influenced by her criminal behavior. The final divorce settlement was nothing like what she had originally planned. Instead of getting half of everything, she ended up with a minimal settlement due to the fraud charges and her behavior throughout the process. The judge made it clear that her actions had demonstrated a pattern of deception that affected how marital assets would be divided. What surprised me most was how I felt when everything was finally over. I had expected to feel vindicated or satisfied that justice had been served. Instead, I mostly felt sad about how everything had turned out. This was someone I had loved and shared my life with for over a decade, and it had all ended with criminal charges and bitter legal battles. My son handled everything with incredible maturity and grace. He never complained about being caught in the middle, and he understood why I had needed to take the steps I did. If anything, the whole experience brought us closer together and showed me what kind of man he had become. The most valuable lesson I learned from all of this was to trust my instincts. When I first found those papers, part of me wanted to confront her directly and try to work things out. I'm grateful I took the time to protect myself first, because it turned out she was even more deceptive than I had initially realized. Looking back, I realized the signs had been there for a long time, but I had been choosing to ignore them. The sudden interest in our finances, the questions about asset values, the suggestions about reorganizing our accounts. She had been setting up her exit strategy for much longer than I had initially thought. The rental property and other assets are back in my name now, and I've learned to be much more careful about financial transparency and documentation. I've also learned the importance of having good legal counsel and keeping detailed records of important financial decisions. As for her, she ended up pleading guilty to reduced charges and received probation along with community service. She also had to pay restitution for the costs associated with investigating and resolving the fraud. The criminal record will follow her for years, which seems like appropriate consequences for what she tried to do. The house feels different now, obviously. It's quieter, but also more peaceful. I'm not walking on eggshells or wondering what someone is planning behind my back. My son visits regularly, and we've grown closer through this whole ordeal. I've started focusing on rebuilding my life and figuring out what I want for the future. Dating feels like something from another lifetime right now, but I'm open to the possibility eventually. For now, I'm just grateful to have my assets protected, my son by my side, and the truth finally out in the open. The whole experience taught me that sometimes protecting yourself isn't just about money or assets. It's about preserving your dignity, your relationships with the people who truly matter, and your ability to move forward with integrity intact. I never wanted things to end this way, but I'm proud that I trusted my instincts and took the necessary steps to protect myself and my family. Sometimes the people closest to us are capable of betrayals we never could have imagined, and the only way to survive is to be prepared for the worst while hoping for the best.